Hello everyone, welcome back to the Truth Channel. We are continuing the reading of the Crucifixion and Death of Jesus Christ by Kelly Ritter. And we are in the chapter, How was the Man on the Shroud of Turin Crucified? So let's continue there in that chapter. These days, to establish that blood indisputably belongs to an MNS positive individual of the AB group, and to exclude DNA contamination, highly specifically techniques were with monoclonal antibodies and molecular studies on the nuclear and mitochondrial in DNA are needed. Indeed, consistent with DNA contamination on the Turin shroud, sequences from multiple subjects of different ethnic origins have been recently detected on the human mitochondrial genome extracted from dust particles in the linen. Innovative concepts are likely to come up using modern research approaches to evaluate the issue of the bloodstains on the Turin shroud. Nor can we rule out the possibility that religious implications of the new findings on the Turin shroud might be envisaged. The ongoing debate will be fierce with passionate, especially in the media. The unique reddish bloodstains on the archaeological cloth known as the Shroud of Turin caught with the attention of several scholars who proposed different hypotheses to explain the unusual blood color. To date, just a few hypotheses have been tested experimentally, and the results are debatable. In this paper, we test the strength of the two hypotheses, namely the presence of the carbohemoglobin and the long-term influence of ultraviolet light on high bilirubin blood. By the spectral reflectance of the blood stains regions on the shroud, and by color analysis of ultraviolet irradiated high bilirubin blood stains in the linen, the relevance of these simple methods to study the stains textiles is discussed. An investigation into the arm of the body and body position retained to obtain the blood pattern visible in the image of the Shroud of Turin was performed using living volunteer. The two short rivulets on the back of the left hand of the shroud are only consistent with a standing subject with arms at a 45-degree angle. The angle is different from that necessary for the forearm stains, which require nearly vertical arms from a standing subject. The BPA of blood visible on the frontal side of the chest, the lance wound, shows the shroud represents the bleeding in a realistic manner for a standing position, while the stains of the back of a supposed post-mortem bleeding from the same wound for a supine corpse totally unrealistic. Simulation of bleeding from the nail wounds contacting wood surfaces yielded unclear results. The Shroud of Turin is one of the most widely known and widely studied artifacts in existence, with enormous historical religious significance. For years, the shroud has inspired worldwide interest in images on its fabric, which appear to be the body and face of a man executed in a manner consistent with crucifixion, and many believe that these images were formed in the shroud's fibers during the resurrection of Jesus of Nazareth. But more recently, other reports have suggested that the shroud also contains evidence of an inscription, and these reports have been used to add crucial support to the view that the shroud is the burial cloth of Jesus. Unfortunately, these reports of inscriptions are based on marks that are barely visible on the shroud, even when the images are enhanced, and the actual existence of writing on the shroud is still a matter of considerable debate. Here we discuss previous evidence concerning the physiological processes involved generally in the perception of writing, and especially when letters and words are distinct. We then report 2 experiments in which the influence of religious context on perception of inscriptions was addressed specifically, using an image of woven fabric, modern linen, containing no writing with no religious province. The image was viewed in 2 different contexts. In the religious context, participants were informed that the image was of linen, and linen artifact that was important to the Christian faith, whereas the non-religious neural context participants were informed that the image was a simple piece of linen. Both groups were told that the image may contain faint words and were assigned to report any words they could see. All participants detected words on the image and indicated that these words were visible and were able to trace on the image the words they detected. In each experiment, more religious words were detected in the religious context condition than the neutral context condition, whereas the 2 contexts showed no effect on the number of religious words that were detected, indicating that religious context had a specific on the perception of the illusory word writing. Indeed, the neutral context condition, no religious words were at all reported on either experiment. These findings suggest that the images were woven material like linen, inspire illusionary perceptions of writing, and that the nature of these perceptions was influenced considerably by the religious expectation of the observers. As a consequence, the normal psychological processes underlying the perception of the writing, and the tendency of these processes to produce illusory perceptions should be an essential consideration when addressing the existence of religious inscriptions on a religious relic, such as the Shroud of Turin. The art of putting to death by nailing or binding to a cross, among the modes of capital punishment known to the Jewish penal law, crucifixion is not found. The hanging of criminals on a tree, mentioned in Deuteronomy 23:22, was resorted to in the New Testament times only after the lapidation. A Jewish court could not have passed the sentence of death by crucifixion without violating Jewish law. The Roman Penal Code recognized this cruel penalty from the remote times. It may have been developed out of the primitive custom of hanging on a fabric or hanging on the arbor inflex, which was dedicated to the gods of their netherworld. Seneca still calls the cross the inflex lunigum. Trees were often used for crucifying convicts. Originally, only slaves were crucified, hence death on the cross, and sepulum servile were used indiscriminately. Later, providential freedmen of obscure station were added to the class of liable sentences. Roman citizens were exempt under all circumstances. The following crimes entailed this penalty: piracy, highway robbery, assassination, forgery, false testimony, mutiny, high treason, rebellion, Soldiers that deserted the enemy and slaves who denounced their masters were also punished by death on the cross. Mode of execution. The crosses used were of different shapes. Some were in the form of St. Andrew's cross, while others were again in 4 parts. The most common consistent stake, firmly embedded in the ground before the condemned arrived at the place of crucifixion, a crossbeam patibulum bearing the titulus, the inscription naming the crime. It was the crossbeam, not the heavy stake, which the condemned man was completed to carry to the place of execution. The cross was not very high, and the sentenced man could, without difficulty, be drawn up with ropes. His hands and feet were fastened with nails to the crossbeam and stake, though it has been held that, as in Egypt, the hands and feet were merely bound with ropes. The execution was always preceded by flagellin, and on his way to his doom, led through the most populous streets, the delinquent was exposed to insult and injury. Upon arrival at the stake, his clothes were removed and the execution took place. Death was probably caused by starvation or exhaustion, the cramped position of his body causing fearful tortures and ultimately gradual paralysis. Whether a footrest was provided is open to doubt, but usually the body was placed on astride a board. The agony lasted at least 12 hours, in some cases as long as 3 days. To hasten death, the legs were broken, and this was considered an act of mercy. The blood remained on the cross for birds. The body remained on the cross for birds of prey until it rotted, or was cast before wild beasts. Special permissions to remove the body was occasionally granted. Officers and soldiers were in charge. The cruel way of carrying into effect the sentence of death was introduced into Palestine by the Romans. Josephus brands the first crucifixion as an act of unusual cruelty as illegal, but many Jews underwent this extreme penalty. During the times of unrest which preceded the rise of the open rebellion against Rome, rebels met with shrift at the hands of the oppressor. They were crucified as traitors. The sons of Judas and Gilead were among those who suffered this fate. All right, we're going to stop there, and we'll continue in the next podcast, so please join us. Thank you.